Hey guys, so welcome back to the Full Stack Web Development course part 5. So last time we left off by understanding some basic HTML tags, alright, or should I say the most frequently used tags, alright, so the ones that you would see most often. And last time I actually told you guys that I would be going through inline and block elements, alright. So let's create a new HTML file, alright, so I have already created one for myself, you can go ahead and do that. So once you're actually ready with your HTML boilerplate, let's go ahead and understand what's the difference between inline and block elements. So in order to understand this, let's go ahead and create some tags. So here I've actually created two paragraph tags. Alright, so as you can see, this is the first paragraph tag and this is the second paragraph tag. Alright, and now let's go ahead onto our live server and actually check out how these paragraphs are actually looking like on the viewport. So if you actually see your viewport, you can actually see that the paragraphs are actually one below the another. But if we go ahead and look at our code, we actually wrote them together. So why is this happening? That once we are actually closing a paragraph tag and specifies some another tag after it, it's actually coming below it. So this is happening because the paragraph tag is actually a block element. All right. So it's going to take up the whole block space in your viewport. All right. So this is actually defined by the red border that I've created here. All right. Don't worry about how that red border got there. It's just a little bit of a CSS touch, but we actually have not gone through it. So I have actually just added it to actually visualize of how much space this paragraph tag is actually going to take. In future, obviously, when we go over CSS, you would obviously know how to create borders. Alright, so as you can see that this paragraph tag is actually taking the whole block space. You can also understand this as a brick. Alright, you can consider the whole viewport as a wall and one tag as one whole brick. So once you specify a block element, it's actually going to place a block of a brick and it's going to take up the whole space. So this is what block elements look like. Alright, now let's go ahead and check out what are inline elements. And obviously you can give me a pretty good guess that inline elements are actually going to be the elements that can actually be put on the same line. Alright, so let's go ahead and check out one of the inline tags. Alright, so I've actually specified a span tag. Alright, now span is just similar to paragraph, it's just an inline element. So you can actually go ahead and write a span tag and specify any data inside it. And once you specify two span tags, go ahead onto your viewport. So now if we have a look at our viewport, you can actually see that those span tags are actually together on the same line, even though in the code we defined them on different lines. Alright, so it's all about whether the tag is a block element or an inline element. Alright, so this is what you need to keep in mind, because while creating designs, this is actually going to play a very major role. Alright, so you need to have an understanding what block elements would do and what inline elements would do. So let's go ahead and specify another set of inline tags. Alright, and this tag is actually known as strong. So this is used for actually bolding some text. Alright, so if you actually write something inside of strong tag, it's actually going to appear in bold. And this is also an inline element. Alright, so if you go ahead and look at your viewport, you can actually see that both the strong tags are actually together. Alright, so this is the difference between inline and block elements. So now you would think that do I have to remember that which tag is inline and which tag is block? Actually no, because anything can be altered with the help of CSS. This is just an example of how block elements and inline elements affect your design. Alright, because with CSS, you can actually create a chunk of tags as inline or block, and you can actually convert them accordingly for any design that you want to achieve. Alright, but you always need to have a mental idea of what you are actually doing. Alright, so while writing CSS in future, you actually need to know whether to convert this tag into a block element or an inline element. Alright, because they both have a different set of characteristics, as you can just currently see on my screen. Because if you specify a paragraph tag, I mean not just paragraph tag, any other tag, alright, and it is actually a block element, and you actually want to write it here, but actually you thought that this tag would actually look good if this was inline. So you can actually go ahead and convert that with the help of CSS. And this concept is actually very important while you are actually making designs, alright, because you always need to create a mental picture in your head of what your website is actually going to look like. and that's how you'll actually be writing your CSS, because the design is actually going to heavily affect how you are actually going to approach writing your CSS. Alright, so now that you actually know the difference between inline and block elements, now let me just give you an example of why you don't need to remember any other tags and whether they are inline or block or not. Alright, so now I'm actually going to introduce the div tag. Alright, so this is the most used tag that you are actually going to see in your web development journey. Alright, and this tag is what I am going to use most while developing my websites. Alright, so because this tag is actually very flexible. Alright, actually any tag in HTML is very flexible, but div is actually something of what I could say vanilla. Alright, so you could actually mix anything with vanilla and create any kind of taste. Alright, so let's go ahead and check out how we can manipulate elements inside of div and how we can make them inline and block. Alright, so first things first, before manipulating any elements inside of our div tag, we actually need to know what div tag itself is. Alright, whether it's an inline element or block element. So let's go ahead and test that out. So let's write a div tag, and I've written hello, I am a div, and now let's go ahead onto a viewport and check out what this div tag actually looks like. Alright, so as you can see, that div tag right here is actually a block element. Alright, so it's actually going to take up the whole space on your viewport. Alright, and now can you see that what did I mean by that div is a vanilla tag? So as you can see that when I specified a strong tag or a paragraph tag or a span tag, they all had some kind of a margin. Alright, so you can see that there is a space between strong and paragraph, and there is a space between paragraph and span. Alright, but there is no space between span and div. Alright, so div is something which comes to you without any predefined styling. Alright, so this space that you are actually seeing is actually the margin or padding space. Alright, and this you can actually define with the help of CSS. And when you are actually creating your websites from scratch, you actually don't want any element on your website that actually has some predefined CSS that you cannot control to some extent. Alright, because you will run into some problems sooner or later. So what I would advise is to go ahead with the div tag, alright, because it's vanilla tag. So now that we know that the div tag is actually a block element, now let's go ahead and define some other tags inside our div tag itself. Alright, so now what I have done here is that I have actually defined all the other tags that we just defined inside our div tag. Alright, so now if we take a look on our viewport, they are actually inside the div box. Alright, so you can see the whole box of the div with this border, and you can also see the other elements inside this div. Alright, so this is how you can actually specify tags inside of tags. Alright, so you are actually given the freedom by HTML to define tags inside of tags. Alright, and this nesting can go as number of times as you want. Alright, so right now what you can see is that each element is having its own way. Alright, so by that I mean that strong tag is actually an inline element, and the p tag is actually a block element, and spans are also obviously inline. Alright, so now let me prove that statement of why you do not need to remember which tag is inline and which tag is block. Alright, because with a little bit of CSS, you can actually manipulate that. Alright, so what I'm going to do right now is I am actually going to write some CSS behind the curtain. Alright, so you won't be intimidated by the CSS. And you would actually see that all of these tags are actually going to get converted into inline elements. Alright, so I've actually edited my CSS, and as you can see currently that I also have the structure as before. So I have all the other tags inside of my div tag. Now let's go ahead and check out how the viewport actually looks like. So as you can see that now every other tag is actually an inline element. So these are strong tags. As you can see, the tags are actually bold because they are inside strong tag, and these are paragraph tags, and these are the span tags. And all of these are now inline elements. Alright, so you don't need to know whether a tag is inline or block. You just need to know how a block element and how an inline element would actually affect your design. Alright, and cause this was actually going to be the last video of HTML, and in the next video we are actually going to start CSS. So this was actually a very important thing to clear out before starting CSS. All right. So now that we actually know the difference between inline and block elements and how they actually affect your design. So now in the next video, we are actually going to go ahead and check out our first CSS script. All right, in which we are actually going to go ahead and style a little bit of our HTML tags. All right, so and if you actually want to see what my CSS actually looked like, so this is what my CSS actually looked like. I know, yeah, it's pretty easy. All right, with one line, you can actually create all the elements as inline. And this is actually Flexbox, all right, which I actually talked about in the previous video a little bit. And this is what we would actually learn in the future when we actually have a good grasp of CSS. And as you can see that the amount of CSS that I wrote just to display the elements, so you can actually see that it's actually quite easy. And I actually guarantee you that you would actually have a pretty good grasp once I teach you CSS to its complete extent. All right. So that's all for this video, and all that we are actually going to do in the next one. So until then, keep chilling at the Code Cove.